should make sure my phone's on silent. This is important.
Okay.
Okay. Start us off.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about CPTSD. I have a hard time actually saying that. It's too many letters. But CPTSD, otherwise known as complex PTSD or complex trauma, I think the best way to understand it actually is to compare it, or rather contrast it, to PTSD, because everyone kind of knows PTSD. It's a word that's been used in society for quite a while. And so I think the most important difference between PTSD and CPTSD is that PTSD is centered on like an event or maybe a couple of significant events that affect you in such a way that it disrupts your sense of getting through the day and your ability to kind of just be grounded in your life. And the difference between that and CPTSD is CPTSD is more of a chronic exposure, many events over a period of a long time that changes not just your sense of well-being, but also your sense of self. I think the main difference between PTSD and CPTSD is CPTSD is much more directed at how it affects your sense of self, your identity, the way you view the world. It kind of it addresses the issues related to attachment, and it has an ability to kind of erode any stable sense of security you've had in the past. And one more thing, I think that what's interesting about the word trauma is that the history of it was originally used for a physical wound. Like, there's a trauma to my leg. So it's this physical wound, and then it gets adopted by the psychological world to mean a psychological wound. And I think the difference between a physical trauma and a psychological trauma is a physical trauma is pain, but a psychological trauma is psychological pain, which isn't an actual physical experience. It's just this sense of fear that is put in you that wasn't there before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like with psychological trauma, it's another thing that it's huge. It's invisible. And when I think about trauma, I think about like if you could imagine that when you got hurt emotionally by someone, and then you had a scar on your shoulder, nobody else can see it, but you can. You got hurt there, so now if somebody accidentally even spills salt on that part of your body, then you're going to feel this intense dysregulation. And so when I think about emotional trauma and those experiences, it's like, sometimes people can judge you more so than when it comes to physicals. Nobody's going to judge you if you spill salt on like an open wound that you got from war. But if somebody says something that triggers you that's very emotional, they're going to say, what's the big deal? Why are you crying about it? But I think with trauma, it's so invisible sometimes that people miss it. And when it comes to complex trauma, it's even deeper. It's like you are, in a sense, your identity becoming a bit of that wound because you're trapped in this experience over and over and over again of being traumatized. It's more chronic. But yeah, when I think about that, it sort of helps me understand why people with trauma can feel so alienated, and, it can also lead to more invalidation, right? Because now on top of the trauma itself, you're experiencing lots of invalidation, which can be huge as well.
It's funny that I like the way you put it, that like someone with a psychological trauma, I think there are toxic people that are going to, in some subtle way, blame you for the fact that you're going through some difficult experience. Like, this trauma is, if you are invalidating about someone's traumatic experience, don't you think that it's like what they're really subtly saying is, if you wanted to fix this, you can fix this. And that doesn't really work when someone has a broken rib.
Yeah.
But for some reason, when you have trust issues that are born out of infidelity, you got to just get over it,
Yeah, just step up, step it up and get over it. Like, I think that also adds another component though that makes it really tricky, because I mean, we're talking about trauma, PTSD, we're talking about complex trauma and the differences of those. But one thing that I think it'd be important to get into is how even the process of healing trauma can feel invalidating to people, because you have one sense of like, just get over it. toughen up that you hear from the world, or under a lot of posts that I'll make about anxiety. Like, you don't get it. You're saying that bad things are going to just happen to me, or good things are going to come my way. I'm not trusting enough. That's the issue. I'm the problem. I'm the reason. Well, some people will invalidate you, but I think when you're in a new space and you're trying to learn how to deal with trauma, it's important to find a safe space and to challenge that thought that change means invalidation. Even though change has met invalidation in so many other spaces, maybe your therapist isn't trying to say that it's your fault, but that there is a way out of this. And it's something that you can do while still not invalidating that this trauma was something that definitely happened to you.
Who do you think's most likely to invalidate someone's psychological trauma?
Like, out of like, what kind of people, or
Like, why do you think that happens? Like, what's going on in the mind of the invalidator?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's a couple of categories. Some people are just very judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think some people will say, well, I was in a spot that tough and I was able to get myself out of it. So why is everybody throwing a pity party for this person who's stuck in it? Or some people, I think, probably grew up in environments where their parents had bigger emotions than them. So they're like, well, I was in a world where my parents were just emotionally dysregulated, and I, even as a child, had to figure out how to figure out on my own. And so then they see somebody that's dealing with trauma and are triggered by things. They're like, well, I threw some dirt on it and got over it. So why can't they, you know?
Well, and I feel like this kind of illustrates. I always think there are two types of people who have gone through psychological distress. You know, it's there's one person that goes through it, experiences the pain, and goes, I never want to let anyone else go through what I just went through. And so when they witness someone experiencing something similar, they're much softer and kinder and helpful and supportive to their process of healing. But then there's a second group of people that it's kind of like the fraternity brother who got hazed himself, and so he thinks that he's obligated and should haze the new pledge. It's that person who was like, well, I went through it, so you should go through it.
Yeah.
And I feel like those people, both groups probably went through some stuff, some pain that impacted them, but only one of those groups has the capacity to empathize to such an extent where they try to make it easier for the person next to them or in front of them.
Yeah. It's like a good question of, like, why do some people go left and some people go right? Like, why do some people empathize, and why do other people start to say, no, I went through this, so it's only fair that you go through it too?
Mm-hmm. But going back to CPTSD, like, I think one of the big main distinctions is this sense of the way it affects your sense of self and identity. And I think that like, someone can have PTSD. They could be totally dissociating because of some trigger or cue in their environment, right? But someone with CPTSD, they're much more. It's much more relational. There's much more of an interpersonal anxiety that kind of leads to a lack of trust in other people. Because ultimately, right? If you're and the fact that CPTSD starts in childhood, this idea that when you're forming ideas and beliefs about people and the world around you and yourself, that you're getting good information. But when you're in such a fight or flight state for such a long time that you find yourself dissociating because your body is too stimulating for you to actually inhabit it, right? When you're an adult and you start to be out in the world, these issues really start to manifest. You know, it'll be hiding enough, but when you get into your first real relationship and all of a sudden your trust issues come out and the way you deal with that can destroy something that could be a lifelong relationship.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about trauma, I think about the magnitude of the experience, right? So if you really take it to the bare bones, before something is traumatic, it's just a negative event, and it's dysregulating. And then you build this if-then statement. Okay, well, I'm not going to turn left on Boulevard today because there's a longer route of traffic. But if it starts to become something that's even more intense, like I touched the burner on a stove, the magnitude of it or the frequency of that's going to matter, and it can be traumatic. But with complex trauma, I think it's this intense magnitude or frequency. It's chronic. It's happening all the time. So the reason I think it's also, though, more relational with complex trauma is because relational wounds are the ones that are most likely to come back and bite you after you've experienced them. Like you can go to like war and then get shot at and then have a severe trauma and come back to civilian life, but never run into another gun in your life. But if you are a kid, or let's take even just the example, like the meme you said about that cat, right? Like if you are a cat and you're traumatized as a baby cat and you don't trust people, then it's much more likely that you're going to interact with other experiences in your life to recreate those same conditions, even when they're safe. So with complex trauma, it's so chronic because one, you've been exposed to a real stressor over and over and over again. It becomes a part of you almost. And then once it's a part of you, even when you're in safe places, it's hard to shake it and you recreate that feeling of rejection or whatever it was that you experienced, I think.
I feel like the base state of someone with CPTSD is this fight or flight. You know, like they're always kind of vigilant towards danger because that's what they know. That's their default life experience is feeling impending danger. And so when you're in that state, you tend to be more likely a highly sensitive person. Like there's a specific woman named Elaine Aron, you know who she wrote a book called Highly Sensitive Person. Anyway, it's a person that is highly sensitive, but isn't like in a specific direction. It's not like they have ADHD or they're autistic. It's just it's a quality, it's a state of being where your senses are just kind of activated, like the type of texture of your shirt, the sounds, right? Like loud sounds like thunderstorms and small sounds like a keyboard tapping, right? Like you're just so, but it's because you're in this state of fight or flight. So of course you're going to be like,
right. Yeah. It's
you
like,
know,
and I think that Gabber Mate talks about this online too. It's like trauma is something that happens to you, but it's also trauma because it's happening in your mind and in your body. It's your interpretation of the experience. And so your body is saturated with dysregulation. And so one of the big differences between complex trauma and PTSD is that with trauma, it leaves a severe mark on your body. But with complex trauma, I think it leaves you are sort of the stain, similar to what we talked about shame. Like with trauma, it's sort of a spot on you, but with complex trauma, you are that spot. And so working through it, your whole body is dysregulated. So that's why a lot of times with complex trauma, you can experience symptoms of dissociation, of leaving your body, things like that.
You know, it's funny you say that because so I feel like people who are often children of narcissistic people tend to have complex trauma. It kind of goes hand in hand, right? And oftentimes someone who's experienced narcissistic abuse, they describe it in a very specific way. They describe it as death by 1,000 cuts. And I think that what you were saying a second ago makes a lot of sense. It's like if PTSD is two blunt force or stab wounds to your side, then CPTSD is 1 million paper cuts that are just stimulated all the time and painful and deeply uncomfortable, and there's no kind of relief from it. I feel like someone with PTSD could probably go days without experiencing the effects. Possibly they can go days, but someone with CPTSD, it's behind their eyes. Like there's no distance from it ever.
Yeah, it's literally all the frequency, the magnitude of it, and the chronology of it all at once. And I will say this: that the more severe the more you experience the trauma, the more severe your symptoms will be. And usually with complex trauma, it's like, okay, well, it can be death by 1,000 cuts from, your past experience. And then I think this is a really big piece because people are probably curious, like, well, how do I work through this? And I think it's by getting new experiences. But the harder, it's tricky because people say, well, yeah, that sounds great. But the issue is that you are now wired to recreate those conditions even in safe places. So when you're dealing with tremendous anxiety because of your complex trauma in relationships and you're dating someone new that's got secure attachment, your fear that they're going to hurt you is going to make it so that you're a little bit more vigilant on the date, and that before they even can say a word, you don't show up to the date because you think that they're going to reject you. And it's sort of like with complex trauma, you've been trained to brace for impact. So people that are watching and wanting to learn, how do I work through complex trauma? Well, I think the first thing to figure out is to identify how are you avoiding that trauma. Because if you can identify how you're avoiding it, then you can get really strategic about, well, how do I start to expose myself to the possibility of bad where the probability of good is higher? Because if you can do that, then you can start to get new experiences and rewire all of your neural circuitry so that your brain starts to pick up on experiences as, oh, wait a minute. Maybe if they're 5 minutes late for the date, they just were stopping to pick flowers up for me. That's a little optimistic, but allowing the space for people to hurt you so that you can also have the capacity for people to regulate you. Now that still is tough, though. It's even more tough with complex trauma because you don't want to just jump into this behaviorally. Trauma-informed care is all about how do you build the skills to tolerate it when things still don't go your way when you're practicing these new things. So how do I learn distress tolerance? And how do I learn how to make sure that I can manage as a safety net on my own and safe places? How can I practice in therapy with my therapist, and to practice these skills?
That's exactly, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this aspect of DBT, but when I worked with people with BPD at the Wake Kendall group, shout out, if you're in Washington, D.C., I suggest you sign up there for a therapist because they're all fantastic. But when you're working with people with BPD, it's we have this part of it called trauma work, and you can't do trauma work with someone until you've stabilized them enough to be able to, really feel pain that they've been avoiding. And to get someone to that state could take years. Like if you're dysregulated enough, if you don't have the coping skills to navigate everyday life, I have a hard time believing you have the coping skills to navigate the traumas that you've been avoiding. So I feel like it's really important for people who, everyone's mind wants to go take a shortcut because going through therapy can be painful itself. But the idea that you jump straight to the worst possible thing is going to discourage you. You're going to not be able to kind of get through it because you didn't take it in a stepwise fashion. And you're going to end up just kind of retreating back into your shell because you didn't build up the resilience to go through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Building up the resilience is huge with DBT work, right? Like that, the stress tolerance, when you're in a state of fight or flight, falling back on like a dear man, as an interpersonal effectiveness tool is huge.
I love, that's my favorite one.
Yeah.
I've told you that before. I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's good.
Like an old man.
People might not have seen that episode, Vinny.
I have, I know of certain people that have seen almost every episode. And I just want to wink to them.
Yeah, you guys get extra credit points. Like, we're not actually going to say the dear man because you guys know what it is.
I'm with two of my clients. Like when you're doing like a professor, like if you read the instructions, you don't have to take this test.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna say a word. If a client mentions that word, here, let's see. What's
Anger's good.
Give me a word. Something stupid.
Bullseye.
Bullseye? No, I'm not gonna notice that. It's gotta be like cantaloupe or something.
Oh, I thought you said any word.
Well, I did. Jambalaya. You know what?
Oh, that's good.
If they say jambalaya, I know they're listening.
Turkish omelet. Something else that I use as a good analogy. I don't actually use this in session, but this is my favorite sort of way that I think about trauma. I would always tell people to, imagine that you are a mouse in a cage. And for the first 10 years of your life, you have the option of going straight and then to the left, or straight and then to the right. So if you can imagine like this square-like cage that you experience life as, this is all you think life actually entails, this left and right decision. And so if you go to the left, you run into a block of cheese that leads to pleasure. And if you go to the right, you step on an electric shock pad that sends a thrilling shock down your body that doesn't feel good. So if you take that mouse, what they'll walk away with is what's called a stuck point in trauma work. And so with that stuck point, it might be, if I turn left, I'll experience pleasure, the cheese. If I turn right, then I'll experience pain. And the reason that it's a stuck point, because a lot of people listening be like, well, that's true, right? Like that mouse, if it went left, it would experience pain. And if it went right, it would experience pleasure. And a lot of my clients say the same thing. Like, you're trying to make me do this trauma work, but it was true that vulnerability is bad. It was true that being a burden was bad. It was true that me trying to assert myself, like, what could I have done different in childhood? To which I will respond, nothing, right? The problem was never you, but when you take that mouse and you drop it out the cage and put it on the ground, if you look at it, you would notice that on year 11, as it's birthed out of this cage, it'll turn left 3 times to make a right turn. That's when you realize that this is the impact of trauma. It's that, yes, it was effective for you to respond to your environment the way you did in order to survive. But now that you're no longer in the cage, you get to turn left, up, right, down 45 degrees, but you don't realize it because your body is trained like, oh yeah, like assertiveness bad, it'll lead to pain. So when you're working through trauma, it's how do you get yourself to turn right in safe places, even though your body is wincing at the shock that it's still imagining from childhood? How do you get over that, what I call like an inner cage experience?
That's an insane analogy. That's a 12 out of 10 analogy.
Dang.
I'm stealing it, but that's like the best analogy
Thanks.
you've ever said.
That's the one that's in my book.
Is it really?
Yeah. I start the book with that.
I need to keep reading it. That's a great fucking analogy.
Thank you. Steal it.
I'm trying not to curse, but
it was so good. You have to add something, right?
The part that really stood out to me was when you said, if you go, isn't there, going left or right, isn't it? It's like, no, you didn't choose that. Like it's that this, I think that's one of the like identity pieces in that analogy that gets really messed up because of trauma is this idea that you're choosing any of it. Like when you're a child and acting a certain way yields punishment and acting other ways does not. In your minds, when you act other ways, you blame yourself for the, or rather, you blame yourself for the punishment when the punishment happens, right? But your mind is always in the back of your head going, yeah, but you could have not been punished if you just did what you were told, right? And it's this idea like, well, because I chose this thing that led to punishment, that means it's my fault. And when you get older and realize the norms you grew up with are not appropriate norms, you kind of have a period of feeling like, well, are there norms at all, or is all of this made up? And the truth is there are norms, but you have to develop them from your internal compass, not from someone else's.
Right. Like a lot of people will live most of their lives not realizing that there's this overly critical judgment of their own behavior in childhood, even though their trauma happened to them. Like, oh, I was too sensitive when this person yelled at me, and they think back to their inner child and they're just like, man, that was really bad. I was so embarrassing, and thank God I've become the person I am today. And when in reality it was like, well, maybe that child had some good stuff in there, right? Like, of course that child had good stuff in there. And now it's just going out in the world and rejecting that part of themselves.
Have you still not seen Good Will Hunting?
No.
Well, there's the famous scene. I've mentioned this in a recent episode, in a previous episode. There's a famous scene where the therapist, played by Robin Williams, tells this kind of young guy who's been traumatized in his childhood by his father, his alcoholic father. He says to him, like, it's not your fault. And they have this very special moment where this traumatized child, now adult, finally releases this sense of responsibility that was never his to take. And it kind of illustrates how deeply ingrained even the smartest person is not aware of how much they are blaming themselves for a situation that is not their fault, like, and like you said, like when you remove the maze, when you pick it up and now you can just move in any direction, the idea of moving any direction but right is terrifying. Or is it left?
Yeah, no, right. Yeah, you got it.
Well,
but yeah.
This gets at the root of all trauma. The root of all psychological trauma is fear.
Yeah, it's fear. And that's exactly what, like in the book that I lay out, it's like, this is the root of all sort of behavior change and things like that. Your ranking system is now tailored to a certain direction that you assume to always be true. Like I would say, if you walk away from an interaction when you're talking with someone and you walk away thinking, oh, I aced that interaction, or you walk away from that interaction thinking, oh my gosh, I really failed at that one. Well, in both of those situations, that's a good time to ask yourself, what are my assumptions about success and failure? Because then you can see if you're living in some sort of mental cage where are you assuming that you didn't get shocked for turning right in that situation or experience pleasure for turning left? So when people ask themselves that question, it can open up the door to, well, maybe I have a false assumption about my ranking system and my point system of life And if you can identify that, then you can really start to escape and start to make real decisions that are based on reality rather than your assumptions about reality. And then people won't start disappearing out of your life, or you won't start missing out on certain opportunities or things related to work, thinking like, why didn't that go right? I did everything right. Well, maybe in your previous environment, you did everything right. Or maybe it just wasn't a good fit and it wasn't a good job for you. But also maybe your ranking system is very biased, which you were told by your trauma. That's no longer true about the future,
Yeah, I feel like it's a good way to put it. Like, what is your trauma telling you? And what you're saying made me think like, uh, when like a prolonged CPTSD like trauma happens, the impact that it has on the recipient is this. They have this worldview. Okay, so we're all born whole, in my opinion. I truly believe that we're all born whole. And then the world impresses upon us in a way that shapes how we interact with it. So if the world impresses upon us some traumatic experience, what our mind has a hard time doing is taking that experience and integrating it into our wholeness. Like almost our wholeness is rejecting it. We can't see how life can be fulfilling and this experience can happen at the same time. And so that lack of being able to integrate those two things to make it make sense, for there to be able to have death in the world and it still be worth living in. Like that's existential. That's an existential issue, but it's like I can't integrate these two somewhat competing thoughts. And therefore my hangups in life are going to be predicated on not being able to connect this stuff. But and I think that's why at the end of trauma work, what you learn to do not only is be more in your body, but also intellectually be able to make sense of this thing that happened to you that you didn't have control over.
Yes, 100%. Because this is exactly what I'll say with like a lot of the anxiously attached clients I work with. Like, if you have anxious attachment and you're feeling that, or a question that I'll ask somebody with anxious attachment, like, what was the version of you that was abandoned? And an even better question might be, what reason do you come up with for why you were abandoned as a child?
That's a good question.
Because if you think about that, you can really realize this is the version of myself that I tried to suppress to secure connection. And so if you do that and you succeed at suppressing that side of yourself, you're going to be extremely afraid of that side of you to come back out. So in therapy, if you can figure out who is the version of me that was rejected and what reason do I come up with, you can start to challenge that belief that I was rejected because I was too much. I was rejected because I was too sensitive, or I was too needy, or sending the wrong text, X, Y, and Z. So if you can identify that and then realize that maybe it wasn't the fact that you were too whatever. Maybe the problem is that you're having this very thought in and of itself. And that's the problem. Because if you constantly think, was I too much? Was I too little? Did I do this right? You're going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy where you will be too little. Because now you're concerned, how do I satisfy this other person? And you're assuming that you're not enough in the relationship. Well, maybe it really just wasn't a good fit. Or maybe the cortisol you're experiencing because you're wondering if you're a good fit might be leading to rejection experiences in and of itself.
That question, the second question, is so good. Like, I'm stealing that one as well. Like, you're not even I feel like if you were to ask them, do you think that it's your fault that blah, blah, blah? They go, no. But if you just go past the question and ask the next one, which is, why do you think why do you think you were abandoned? How did you phrase it?
What was the version of
No, the
you?
second one.
What reason do you come up with for why you were abandoned?
What reason? It's like, and that kind of gets to my point I was making a second ago, which is, so it's not like you some traumatic event happens to you and now you can't make sense of that experience with the rest of the world. And that rift is the issue. But you don't just stay in a state of unknowing. You create a false narrative, the reason. What's the reason? Well, why is it your fault specifically? And that unique answer tells you so much about a person. It's crazy.
Exactly. It's and that goes back to that Gabor Mate a quote or whatever he
I
said.
feel like you're saying his name wrong. Do you want to wait? Hold on, really quickly.
He's gonna be so offended, and
No.
he's someone I really look up to.
I need to. First of all, I think it's Gabor, but I just want to. Let's do this on the podcast.
I think it's Gabor.
This is good content. Is it with a P? Pronunciation.
ADHD. He understands. I have ADHD, and he specializes in ADHD.
I've been wanting to know too.
Canadian physician and author, Gabor Mate.
Wow, you're way off.
Well, I'm talking about somebody different. His name's Gabor Mate.
Oh yeah, that other guy.
Yeah, but also Gabor Mate.
I figured I'd catch it early just so. I mean, imagine you're like clipping
so
this
funny.
and you're saying the most profound, which you've been cooking today.
Thank you.
But you say the most profound thing, and just the comments are like, "This guy doesn't know how to pronounce."
We're gonna clip every time I say his name out because if this blows up, and he's never gonna want to. No, he might laugh, and then we'll interview.
Gabor Mate, Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate.
What if I just call him Gabe? Like, so Gabe, tell me about your childhood in Warsaw, Poland.
I feel like he'd be fine with that. He does a lot of good work, though. You look at his stuff.
I look at his stuff. I find his voice very calming, so it's hard for me to get through. It's like Noam Chomsky. I stopped listening. I just kind of those.
Oh my gosh!
No, I really like him though.
But I forgot what you said. But the quote that was supposed to relate to it was
The reason.
The reason. Yes. Why did your trauma happen? The trauma he talks about is not necessarily what happened to you, but how you interpreted the event. And then that really goes into the literature of stuck points that you can work towards challenging if you're working towards healing. So if you read any of his books and you're listening to the podcast, I would say read his books if you're listening to this podcast episode. It's really helpful when you're trying to figure out and deal with trauma.
I read 3 pages of In the Realm of Ghosts, and then it's died in my Kindle library.
I've never heard of that one.
It's one of his popular ones, but
Oh, really?
But with the 7 minutes left, I thought, because we're very in our minds talking about stuff, but it's important to also identify that part of probably the worst part of CPTSD has nothing to do with the neck up experience. It's that sense of paralysis that you feel in your body. It's that fight or flight that kind of never goes away, the cortisol that never goes down. It's the dissociating that happens, which I think is one of the most characteristic parts of CPTSD, and it's involved in other disorders too. But for anyone that's dissociated before, it's this very real experience of you could be staring at someone and be completely vacant in your eyes because you are not there at all. It's not like this half listening experience someone might have with ADHD. This is I am no longer in this space. I've completely retreated into my mind because my mind historically has been the safest place for me, which is paradoxically the number one mistake I think that leads to the development of CPTSD without people knowing it is when they get in fight or flight at a very young age, their mind has an incentive. It's like, ooh, you're vulnerable. Let me give you a solution. You're feeling uncomfortable? Come up here. We can hang out together. We can chat for hours. And it'll be safe up here, right? And so dissociating at its core is your mind has convinced you to retreat up into it because your body is just not safe.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. Yeah, you're going and retreating to a place of safety. And I think a lot of people with complex PTSD, they will lean towards avoidance, preparation, and security in their own ways. Whatever it is, it's a lack of vulnerability. And I think a lot of people will wonder, well, how do I fix this? And I always say the solution with complex PTSD is to allow good things to happen to you outside of your awareness, preparation, or control. And that's a big ask. And it's not something that I think you can do without preparation and control, just like it's rooted in the issue. You have to first build up some sense of agency, control, possibly through therapy, possibly through skills, through trauma-informed care, that allows you to later on practice healthy vulnerability and allows you to allow space for people to come to your rescue in life. Because if you're always up on a mountain of safety and control, you're going to feel safe, but you're going to still have anxiety because you're feeling safe inside of a panic room, right? So if you let go of control in a safe way with someone that you trust, I think that's the best way that you can beat it, because that's going to allow you to get new experiences, and good things are going to start happening to you. And it's not going to be because of your own power and effort. It's going to be because somebody loves you, you know?
What you're saying is perfectly aligned with what we were just talking about too, because it's like if one of the root issues of CPTSD is this internalized blame for the trauma, then how does one overcome such a deeply rooted belief about why bad things are happening to them? You act in the opposite direction by allowing things outside of your control to happen positively to you. You know, the idea of being vulnerable and not knowing what will happen because it's outside of your control, and all of a sudden it's met with this positive support. You've just done something that completely counteracts this idea that it's your fault.
Yeah, dang, that's perfect. Because like if trauma happens to you and you take too much of the blame, now it's your responsibility because you're to blame to do all the work. And this is one way to remove that factor of like, this trauma happened to you, so why are you having to run around and protect? You know, it's like it's unfair that you had to protect yourself.
In DBT, when you start the groups, there's this page where it's just like these. It's like a religion. It's so funny, but it's like there's these list of like 8 sentences where it's like, you know, I honestly can't think of any of them, but the one I'm about to say. But one of them is, you may have not caused this thing that has happened to you, but you are still responsible to fix it. And I think that that's an important distinction. And it really, DBT really just kind of punches you in the balls, probably a little too much. But saying something like that, there's truth to it, because you did not cause the trauma to happen to you. And if you don't do anything, it will not be healed. And I think the other part about the idea of what a healed trauma looks like can often be the thing keeping someone from completely healing, which is this idea that you're going to get rid of it, that it's going to go away, and you're going to live a life like it never happened. The deeper truth of trauma is the only way you can become well adjusted after a traumatic experience is accept that it's going to be there in some capacity forever, because you have memory and part of your experiences includes that thing.
Wow. That's good.
No comment.
No comment, nothing to add. I mean, that makes perfect sense. People will come up with, should you, you know, if you just sit around and process your trauma, then that means you're being a victim to it and you're not taking accountability. But
who fucking says that? People do.
Honestly,
it just irritates me.
This guy that Gabor Mate was interviewing was asking him a question just like that, and it was like he was sort of arguing like, some people you just want to sit around and process, and his response was like, accountability is processing your trauma. You can't separate the two. And I was like, that's such a good point, because if you're taking the time to, some people think that processing trauma looks like, oh, well, this triggers me, so leave me alone, and I have every right to keep blowing up and having a short temper because you triggered me. This was my trigger word, so now I can get away with my reactions. That's not what processing trauma looks like. Processing trauma looks more like, I do want to notice what feels like a traumatic response to me, and I want to find ways to fully recondition myself to respond to my environment in different ways for the benefit of the people around me. And that falls all under the umbrella, I think, of processing, because it gives you new information of how to respond differently to your environment.
And it shows the stepwise process of healing. Like step 1 is getting yourself into a state of readiness to endure the pain of feeling the trauma. But then step 2 is identifying what it is. And step 3 is uncoupling your sense of self from the experience. Like, I am not going to blame myself because this thing happened, and therefore my sense of self is not associated with the thing that happened to me. It is independent of it.
Yes. Yeah. That's so funny. I always come up with like a 3-step process. When I work, I'm like, the first step is to identify, then it's to challenge, and then it's to reintegrate. But I think there's different ways to go about those steps.
ICR, you know?
Identify,
challenge,
I see real change.
Sometimes I like to mess with clients and my wife by saying something like that, but then not using the right letters. ICF.
Is something wrong with me?
Anyway,
I fully accepted it.
Just so we don't go too far over. last thought on trauma. How do you heal it in two words?
McDonald's. McDonald's Sunday.
McDonald's Sunday.
Somebody else has to buy you the Sunday though.
That heals your relational trauma.
Exactly. That's gonna taste so good to you, and yeah, that's how I would say.
I think that's how we're gonna end it.
Yeah. Good.
Well, we'll see you in the next episode where I'm wearing the same shirt.
That's right.